Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Discovery, staring at the star charts displayed on the main screen. 3 months they had been traveling toward the Outer Rim territories, heading for a meeting that could change humanity's place in the galaxy forever. The brass back on Earth had called it a routine diplomatic mission, but Jake knew better. Nothing about meeting the Vorthak Empire could ever be called routine. The Vorthak were legends whispered about in every corner of known space. For over 3,000 years, they had controlled 17 star systems through sheer physical power. Their homeworld Krethis was a nightmare that would kill most species within minutes. Acid rain fell from toxic skies while gravity crushed down with twice the force of Earth normal. The creatures that lived there were monsters that even other Deathworld species feared. Jake walked over to his science officer, Lisa Rodriguez, who was hunched over her workstation reviewing data they had gathered about their destination. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her brown eyes showed the strain of weeks spent trying to understand an alien species that seemed impossible by human standards. "Tell me again what we're dealing with," Jake said, though he had heard the briefing a dozen times already. Lisa looked up from her screen and shook her head slowly. The Vorthak average 12 feet in height and weigh close to 800 pounds. Their bones are 4 times denser than human bones. Their muscle fibers are so thick, they can crush steel with their bare hands. They have natural armor plating that grows from their skin like living metal. She pulled up an image on her screen showing a Vorthak warrior in full battle gear. The creature looked like something from humanity's worst nightmares. 4 arms extended from a massive torso covered in black chitinous plates. The head was elongated with burning orange eyes that seemed to glow with inner fire. Sharp teeth filled a mouth that could bite through reinforced hull plating. "Their home planet has an atmosphere that would burn our lungs in seconds," Lisa continued. "The air pressure would crush us flat. The temperature swings from boiling hot to freezing cold within hours. And that's just the environment. The native predators make Earth's dinosaurs look like house pets." Jake studied the image with growing concern. His crew of 200 humans was brave and well-trained, but they were still just humans. Soft, fragile beings who needed environmental suits to survive in space and artificial gravity to keep their bones from weakening. How could they possibly deal with creatures that were essentially living weapons? The communication officer called out from across the bridge. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission. It's massive and coming in fast." "On screen," Jake ordered. The view screen flickered and then showed empty space. Then something began to emerge from hyperspace that made Jake's stomach drop. The Vorthak dreadnought was enormous, easily 10 times the size of the Discovery. Its hull was black metal covered in spikes and weapon ports. It looked less like a starship, and more like a floating fortress designed by someone who believed that bigger and more threatening was always better. "My God," whispered Navigation Officer Danny Walsh from his station. "That thing could swallow our entire ship." The name painted on the side of the dreadnought was visible even from their distance. Bone Crusher. Jake thought that pretty much summed up Vorthak philosophy in 2 words. "Incoming transmission," the communications officer announced. "Put it through," Jake said, straightening his uniform and trying to look more confident than he felt. The screen filled with the image of what could only be a Vorthak commander. The creature was even larger than the images had suggested, with scars covering the visible portions of its armor plating. When it spoke, its voice came through the translator as a sound like grinding stone mixed with distant thunder. "Human vessel, I am War Chief Thorgak of the Bone Crusher. You have requested an audience with the Vorthak Empire. Prepare to be boarded. Any signs of treachery will result in the immediate destruction of your ship and crew." The transmission ended before Jake could respond. "Well, that was friendly," muttered Chief Engineer Maria Santos from her position near the reactor controls. Jake turned to address his senior staff. "Listen up, people. This is what we came here for. We knew the Vorthak would be direct and probably threatening. Our job is to establish diplomatic relations with the most powerful military force in this sector of the galaxy. Stay calm, follow protocol, and remember that Earth is counting on us to make this work." 20 minutes later, Jake stood in the main cargo bay with his senior officers, waiting for their visitors to arrive. The bay had been cleared and prepared according to Vorthak customs they had studied during the long journey. The lighting was dimmed to match what their guests would find comfortable, and the temperature had been raised to account for their different physiology. The docking port sealed with a heavy thunk that shook the entire ship. Jake heard the mechanical sounds of the airlock cycling. followed by footsteps so heavy they seemed to shake the deck plating. When the inner door opened, Jake got his first real look at a living Vorthak. War Chief Thorgak had to duck to fit through the reinforced doorway. His massive frame filled the entrance, and Jake could see why these beings had conquered so much of the galaxy, through force alone. The Vorthak's forearms moved with fluid grace despite their size, and his orange eyes scanned the assembled humans with what looked like mild curiosity. 2 more Vorthak warriors followed him into the cargo bay, each one carrying weapons that looked like they could punch holes through starship hulls. They positioned themselves on either side of their commander, and waited with the patience of natural predators. Thorgak stepped forward until he stood directly in front of Jake. The human commander had to crane his neck to look up at the alien's face. When Thorgak spoke, his voice filled the cargo bay with sound. "Commander Jake Morrison of the human ship Discovery, your species has requested this meeting. I am here to determine if your kind is worth the time and resources of the Vorthak Empire." Jake took a deep breath and responded as steadily as he could. "War Chief Thorgak, humanity is honored to meet with representatives of the Vorthak Empire. We come seeking mutual understanding and the possibility of cooperation between our peoples." Thorgak's mandibles clicked together in what might have been amusement. "Cooperation? Humans, do you understand what you are asking? The Vorthak have ruled through strength for 3 millennia. We have conquered worlds that other species could not even visit. We have defeated enemies that your kind could not comprehend." The war chief began walking around Jake and his officers, examining them like a predator studying potential prey. "Your files say you come from Earth, which your own records classify as a Deathworld. Yet you appear soft and weak. Your bones look hollow. Your skin seems thin enough to tear with minimal pressure. You carry artificial weapons because you have no natural ones." He stopped in front of Jake again and leaned down until their faces were only inches apart. Jake could smell something like hot metal and ozone coming from the alien's breathing apparatus. "Tell me, Commander Morrison, what makes your species think it can survive in a galaxy where the Vorthak set the rules? What makes you believe you have anything to offer beings who can crack planets with their bare hands?" Jake felt the weight of first contact pressing down on him like the gravity of a gas giant. Everything humanity had dreamed of, their entire future among the stars, depended on how he answered this question. Around him, his crew waited in tense silence, knowing that their commander's next words would determine whether humanity would be accepted as a new player in galactic politics or dismissed as irrelevant insects. The Discovery hung in space beside the massive Bone Crusher, 2 ships representing civilizations that had developed in completely different ways. One built on overwhelming force and physical domination, the other on adaptation and technological innovation. In a few moments, both species would learn which approach would prove more valuable in the long run. Jake Morrison stared up into War Chief Thorgak's burning orange eyes and made a decision that would change everything. Instead of backing down or trying to explain humanity's technological achievements, he did something the Vorthak commander did not expect. He smiled. "War Chief, you want to know what makes humans special? We don't just survive on death worlds, we turn them into homes. But I think actions speak louder than words. If you want to see what humanity can do, test us." Thorgak's forearm shifted slightly and the massive alien tilted his head in what might have been curiosity. The 2 Vorthak warriors behind him exchanged glances that Jake could not interpret, but their grip on their weapons seemed to loosen just a bit. "You propose a challenge?" Thorgak asked, his voice rumbling through the cargo bay like distant thunder. "You would risk your crew against Vorthak trials?" "I would risk 3 of my crew against whatever tests you think are fair," Jake replied. "If they fail, then you can dismiss humanity as weak and send us back to Earth. But if they succeed, then maybe we can talk about what real cooperation between our species might look like." For several long moments, the only sound in the cargo bay was the quiet hum of the ship's life support systems. Thorgak stared down at Jake with those glowing eyes, and Jake could almost see the alien commander weighing his options. Finally, the war chief straightened to his full height and nodded slowly. "Very well, human. The Vorthak will grant you the proving. 3 trials on the surface of Krathus Prime. Your champions will face tests of combat, endurance, and intelligence. Prepare your crew. We depart immediately." 2 hours later, Jake found himself in the ship's briefing room with his senior staff, trying to decide which 3 people he would send to face trials designed by the galaxy's most feared warriors. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a physical force. "The combat trial is obvious," said Marine Sergeant Danny Walsh. rolling his shoulders as he spoke. I'll take that one. I've trained in 7 different martial arts and I've fought in low gravity, high gravity, toxic atmospheres, and underwater. Whatever they throw at me, I can handle. Danny was built like a bull with thick muscles and scars from a dozen different conflicts. He had joined the Marines at 18 and had never backed down from a fight in his life. If anyone could survive a physical confrontation with a Vorthak warrior, it would be him. The endurance trial should be mine, volunteered Chief Engineer Maria Santos. I've spent more time in hostile environments than anyone else on this ship. I've worked in the reactor cores of failing stations, repaired hull breaches in vacuum, and kept systems running in conditions that should have killed me. I can outlast whatever they put me through. Maria was small and wiry, but Jake knew she was tougher than reinforced steel. She had grown up on Mars before the terraforming was complete, breathing recycled air and drinking reclaimed water while radiation storms raged outside the domes. If anyone could survive impossible conditions, it was her. That leaves intelligence, said Dr. Kevin Hayes, adjusting his glasses nervously. I suppose that would be my area. I have degrees in quantum physics, xenobiology, and computer science. I've solved problems that teams of experts said were impossible. Kevin was thin and pale, the kind of person who looked like he spent most of his time indoors reading books. But Jake had seen him work miracles with technology that other engineers could not even understand. If the Vorthak had puzzles that needed solving, Kevin was humanity's best hope. The journey to Krethis Prime took 6 hours aboard the Bone Crusher. Jake and his chosen champions were given quarters that had been modified for human needs, though everything was still built to Vorthak scale. The beds were like small platforms and the doors were tall enough for giants to walk through without ducking. During the trip, Thorgak came to visit them in what passed for diplomatic courtesy among his people. He brought with him detailed explanations of what each trial would involve, though Jake suspected the war chief was also studying them for weaknesses. The combat trial will be single combat against warrior Gorvek, Thorgak explained to Danny. He is young but strong, with over 200 victories in the arena. The fight continues until one combatant cannot rise. Killing is permitted but not required. Danny nodded grimly. Understood. What weapons will be allowed? None, Thorgak replied. This is a test of natural ability. Your strength, speed, and skill against his. Jake saw Danny's jaw tighten, but the Marine just nodded again. Fighting a Vorthak hand-to-hand was probably suicide. But Danny had never been one to back down from impossible odds. The endurance trial takes place in the deep chamber, Thorgak continued, turning to Maria. You will be sealed in conditions that simulate the worst environments from 12 different Deathworlds. Temperature extremes, atmospheric toxins, crushing pressure, and corrosive gases. The record survival time is 4 hours and 17 minutes set by a Vorthak warrior. Maria smiled grimly. How long do I need to last to pass? Survival itself is passing. The length of time determines the degree of honor you earn. Finally, Thorgak addressed Kevin. The intelligence trial is overseen by High Scholar Zarek, our greatest thinker. You will be presented with a quantum crystalline matrix that controls our most advanced technology. It has been damaged and our best minds have been unable to repair it for over 50 years. If you can restore its function, you will have achieved something no Vorthak has managed in 2 generations. Kevin pushed his glasses up his nose and asked quietly, What tools will I be allowed to use? Whatever you can carry with you. But remember, this matrix is made from materials that exist nowhere else in the galaxy. Standard human technology may not be compatible with its structure. When they arrived at Krethis Prime, Jake got his first look at the Vorthak homeworld through the ship's viewports. The planet was a swirling mass of dark clouds shot through with flashes of lightning. Acid rain fell in sheets across continents covered in jagged mountains and steaming swamps. Even from space, the world looked like it was trying to kill anything that dared approach it. The landing was rough, with the ship shaking and bucking as it descended through the violent atmosphere. When they finally touched down at the Vorthak capital city, Jake could see why these beings had become the galaxy's premier warriors. Everything was built like a fortress, with thick walls and defensive positions that could withstand attacks from land, sea, or air. The arena where the trials would take place was carved into the side of a mountain. Thousands of Vorthak spectators filled the seats, their voices creating a constant rumble like distant thunder. Jake had never seen so many of the massive aliens in one place, and the sight was both impressive and terrifying. The first trial began immediately. Danny Walsh stepped into the arena wearing simple combat fatigues, while his opponent Gorvek entered from the opposite side. The Vorthak warrior was young by his people's standards, but he still stood over 11 feet tall and looked like he was carved from living stone. When the fight began, Jake thought it would be over in seconds. Gorvek moved forward with the confidence of someone who had never lost, his forearms reaching out to grab Danny and end the contest quickly. But Danny had other ideas. Instead of trying to match the Vorthak's strength, Danny moved like liquid lightning. He ducked under Gorvek's first grab and struck at the alien's knee joint with a precise kick that made the giant stumble. When Gorvek swung a massive fist that could have crushed Danny's skull, the human flowed around the attack and landed a series of quick strikes on nerve clusters he had memorized from Vorthak anatomy charts. The crowd fell silent as they watched something impossible. The small human was not just surviving against their champion. He was making the Vorthak warrior work for every attack. Danny could not match Gorvek's strength, but he was faster, more flexible, and infinitely more creative in his approach to combat. The fight lasted 18 minutes. Danny finally went down when Gorvek managed to land a glancing blow that sent the human flying across the arena floor. But when Danny tried to rise again on shaking legs, blood streaming from his nose and mouth, the entire arena erupted in something Jake had never expected to hear from Vorthak spectators. They were cheering for the human. The cheering died down as medical staff rushed onto the arena floor to help Danny Walsh. Jake watched from the viewing platform as Vorthak healers worked alongside human medics to treat the Marine's injuries. Danny was conscious and trying to sit up, which Jake took as a good sign. But more importantly, something had changed in the way the Vorthak spectators looked at the humans. War Chief Thorgak stood beside Jake, his forearms crossed over his massive chest. The alien commander's orange eyes were focused on Danny being helped off the arena floor, and Jake could see something like respect in that burning gaze. "Your warrior fought with honor," Thorgak said quietly. "In 3,000 years of Vorthak history, no challenger has lasted more than 8 minutes against one of our champions. Your Danny Walsh fought for 18 minutes against warrior Gorvek, and he did not surrender even when defeat was certain." Jake nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and worry for his injured crew member. Danny never learned how to give up. Sometimes I think that's humanity's greatest strength and our biggest weakness. "Perhaps," Thorgak replied. "We shall see how your other champions perform." The second trial began an hour later. Chief Engineer Maria Santos was led to what the Vorthak called the Deep Chamber, a sealed room buried deep beneath the arena. Jake and the other observers watched through thick viewing ports as Maria was sealed inside, wearing only basic environmental gear. The chamber immediately began cycling through different atmospheric conditions. First came crushing pressure that would have flattened most beings like insects. The gravity increased to 3 times Earth normal, making every step a struggle. Then the temperature spiked to levels that would boil water, followed by a drop to freezing cold that turned the air itself into visible clouds. Jake watched Maria move through the chamber like she was taking a casual walk. She checked her equipment methodically, conserved her energy, and found ways to use the changing environment to her advantage. When acid vapor filled the air, she positioned herself near the ventilation system. When the gravity increased, she stayed low and moved in short, efficient bursts. "How does she do that?" asked a Vorthak observer standing near Jake. The alien sounded genuinely puzzled. "The conditions in that chamber have killed trained warriors. Your human moves as if she belongs there." Jake smiled grimly. "Maria grew up on Mars during the early terraforming years. She's been dealing with hostile environments since she could walk. This is just another day at the office for her." Hour after hour, Maria endured conditions that should have killed her. The Vorthak record holder had lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes before collapsing. When Maria passed that mark and kept going, Jake heard murmurs of disbelief from the watching crowd. She finally emerged after 6 hours and 23 minutes, tired but walking under her own power. The Vorthak medical staff who examined her found it hard to believe she was still conscious, much less in good condition, but it was the third trial that truly shook the foundations of Vorthak understanding. Dr. Kevin Hayes was led to a laboratory deep within the mountain city. The room was filled with equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie, all designed for beings twice the size of humans. In the center of the room sat what the Vorthak called their quantum crystalline matrix, a device that controlled their most advanced technology. The matrix looked like a sculpture made from living light trapped in crystal. It pulsed with energy that made the air itself seem to vibrate. But parts of it were dark and lifeless, damaged by age and accidents that had accumulated over centuries. High Scholar Zarek was the oldest Vorthak Jake had ever seen. His natural armor was scarred and pitted with age, and his movements were slower than the other aliens. But his eyes burned with intelligence that seemed to peer right through anyone he looked at. "Human Kevin Hayes," Zarek said in a voice like grinding stone. "This matrix has defeated our greatest minds for 53 years. It controls the power systems for our most important installations. Without it functioning properly, entire cities operate at reduced capacity." Kevin adjusted his glasses and walked slowly around the matrix, studying it from every angle. He pulled out a standard human multi-tool, the kind that engineers carried everywhere, and began taking readings with instruments that looked primitive compared to the Vorthak equipment filling the room. "May I ask what happened to damage it originally?" Kevin asked politely. Zarek's mandibles clicked in what might have been surprise. "A power surge during a stellar storm. The feedback damaged the primary crystalline structures and disrupted the quantum alignment matrix. We have tried replacing the damaged components, but the new crystals will not integrate with the existing structure." Kevin nodded and continued his examination. Jake watched from the observation area above, knowing that this trial would determine not just humanity's future with the Vorthak, but possibly their entire relationship with galactic civilization. For the first hour, Kevin did nothing but observe and take notes. He used his multi-tool to scan different parts of the matrix, comparing readings and muttering to himself in the way that scientists did when they were working through complex problems. Then he did something that made every Vorthak in the room freeze in shock. He began taking the matrix apart. "What is he doing?" Thorgak demanded. "That device is irreplaceable. If he damages it further, it will be completely useless." Jake watched Kevin work with growing amazement. The human scientist was not just randomly dismantling the device. He was following some pattern that only he could see, removing components in a specific order while making careful adjustments to each piece. "He sees something we don't," Jake said quietly. Kevin has always been able to look at complex systems and understand how they work on a level that most people can't reach. He's not destroying the matrix. He's fixing it. For 2 hours, Kevin worked with patient precision. He used tools from his multi-toolkit to make microscopic adjustments to crystalline structures that the Vorthak had considered impossibly delicate. He rerouted energy pathways using techniques that had never been tried before. The Vorthak scientists watching from the gallery grew increasingly agitated as Kevin's work continued. Some of them wanted to stop him before he could cause irreversible damage. Others were fascinated by approaches they had never considered. High Scholar Zarek stood perfectly still, watching every move Kevin made with burning intensity. Jake could see the ancient Vorthak's mind working, trying to understand the logic behind what the human was doing. Then, without warning, the matrix began to glow brighter than it had in over 50 years. The damaged sections that had been dark for decades suddenly blazed with light. Energy flowed through pathways that had been blocked for generations. The entire device hummed with power that made the air itself sing. But Kevin was not finished. He continued making adjustments, fine-tuning the matrix beyond its original specifications. When he finally stepped back and declared his work complete, the device was operating at 30% higher efficiency than it had ever achieved before. The silence in the laboratory was complete. Every Vorthak present stared at the restored matrix in disbelief. High Scholar Zarek approached Kevin slowly, his ancient eyes wide with something that might have been awe. "How?" Zarek asked simply. "How did you accomplish in 2 hours what our greatest minds could not achieve in 50 years? Kevin cleaned his glasses nervously before answering. "You were trying to replace the damaged components with identical parts. But the matrix had evolved beyond its original design through decades of use. The new components needed to be adjusted to match the changes that had occurred naturally over time." He pointed to specific areas of the now glowing device. "I didn't restore it to its original state. I helped it become what it was trying to become. Sometimes the best way to fix something isn't to make it like new, but to help it grow into something better." Zarek stared at Kevin for a long moment, then did something no one expected. The ancient Vorthak scholar bowed his massive head in respect. "You have taught me something new, human Kevin Hayes. In all my years of study, I never considered that technology might evolve like a living thing. You have opened my mind to possibilities I had never imagined. Jake felt a strange mixture of pride and bewilderment. In one day, his crew had challenged every assumption the Vorthak held about strength, endurance, and intelligence. Danny had shown that courage and skill could compete with raw power. Maria had demonstrated that adaptation was stronger than natural resistance, and Kevin had proven that human creativity could surpass centuries of traditional thinking. As they prepared to leave the laboratory, Jake realized that something fundamental had changed. The Vorthak were no longer looking at humans as weak creatures to be dismissed or conquered. They were beginning to see them as something else entirely. The news of what happened in the trials spread through the Vorthak capital like wildfire. Within hours, every citizen in the mountain city knew that 3 small humans had achieved things that challenged everything they believed about strength and intelligence. The reaction was unlike anything in Vorthak history. Jake Morrison found himself in the strange position of being a celebrity among beings who could crush him with one hand. Everywhere he went in the city, young Vorthak would stop and stare at him and his crew with something that looked like wonder. The older Vorthak were more reserved, but Jake could see them watching and thinking about what they had witnessed. War Chief Thorgak had given the humans quarters in the palace while the High Council decided what to do about their request for an alliance. The rooms were enormous by human standards, with furniture carved from solid stone and windows that looked out over the sprawling city below. On the second day after the trials, Thorgak came to visit them personally. The massive alien commander looked troubled in a way that Jake had not seen before. His usual confident bearing seemed shaken, and his orange eyes held questions that he was clearly struggling to understand. "Commander Morrison," Thorgak said as he settled his huge frame into a chair that groaned under his weight, "I need to ask you something that I have never had to ask before." "How do you do it?" Jake looked up from the reports he had been writing for Earth Command. "Do what exactly?" "Survive," Thorgak said simply. "Your species should not exist. You have no natural weapons, no armor, no resistance to toxins or radiation. Your bones are hollow, your skin tears easily, and your muscles are weak compared to most galactic species. Yet you thrive on a death world that would kill most civilizations." The war chief leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. "More than that, you sent 3 of your people to face trials designed to test the limits of Vorthak endurance and ability. Not only did they survive, they excelled. They showed us ways of thinking and acting that we had never considered." Jake set down his datapad and looked directly at Thorgak. "Can I tell you a story about Earth history?" Thorgak nodded slowly. "Thousands of years ago, before humans had any technology beyond simple tools, we used to hunt animals much larger and stronger than ourselves. Mammoth, giant bears, saber-toothed cats, creatures that could kill a human with a single swipe of their claws." Jake stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the alien cityscape. "We couldn't outrun them or outfight them, so we developed a different strategy. We would track an animal for days, sometimes weeks. We would follow it everywhere it went, never letting it rest, never letting it eat in peace. Eventually the animal would collapse from exhaustion, not because we were stronger, but because we refused to give up. We call it persistence hunting, and it shaped everything about how humans think and act." Thorgak's eyes glowed brighter as he considered this. "You outlast your enemies instead of overpowering them." "More than that," Jake continued. "We adapt. When we face a problem we can't solve with strength, we find another way. When our environment tries to kill us, we change it or change ourselves. Danny couldn't match your warrior's strength, so he used speed and technique. Maria couldn't survive your endurance chamber through natural resistance, so she used intelligence and experience. Kevin couldn't build a new quantum matrix from scratch, so he helped the old one evolve." Dr. Hayes looked up from his own work at a nearby table. "If I may add something, Commander, the Vorthak have spent 3,000 years perfecting the art of conquest through strength. That's impressive, but it's also limiting. You've optimized for one solution to every problem." Kevin adjusted his glasses and continued. "Humans have spent the same time learning to find multiple solutions to every problem. We don't have one way of doing things. We have thousands of ways, and we keep inventing new ones." Lisa Rodriguez, who had been studying Vorthak cultural files, joined the conversation. "Your entire civilization is built around the idea that the strongest should rule. But what happens when you meet a problem that can't be solved by being strong?" She pulled up a holographic display showing images from various human colonies. "We've terraformed dead worlds, built cities inside asteroids, established settlements in the coronas of stars. Places where Vorthak's strength would be useless, but human adaptability makes us thrive. Thorgak stared at the images for a long time. Jake could almost see the alien commander's worldview shifting as he processed what he was seeing. Finally, Thorgak spoke in a voice that was quieter than his usual rumbling tone. "You are saying that we have been thinking about survival in the wrong way." "Not wrong," Jake said carefully. "Just incomplete. Your strength is real and valuable, but it's not the only form of power in the universe." Chief Engineer Maria Santos, who had recovered quickly from her trial in the deep chamber, looked up from the Vorthak technical manuals she had been studying. "Your people are incredible engineers. The things you've built, the scale of your construction projects, the durability of your technology, but you build everything the same way, with the same philosophy." She gestured to the stone furniture around them. "Everything is built to be strong enough to withstand anything. But sometimes it's better to build something flexible that can bend without breaking." Over the following days, Jake and his crew found themselves in conversations with Vorthak from every level of their society. Scientists, engineers, military officers, and even common citizens came to ask questions about human philosophy and methods. The most surprising visitor was a group of young Vorthak warriors who had watched Danny's fight in the arena. They wanted to learn about human combat techniques, not to replace their own methods but to add new tools to their abilities. "Warrior Danny Walsh showed us that there are ways to fight that we never considered," said one of them, a young female named Kithara. "We have always believed that the strongest fighter wins, but he proved that the smartest fighter can compete with the strongest." Danny, who was still recovering from his injuries but in good spirits, spent hours teaching the young Vorthak about human martial arts. He showed them how to use an opponent's strength against them, how to strike at weak points for maximum effect, and how to keep fighting even when victory seemed impossible. "The key," Danny told them, "is to never think of yourself as weak just because your enemy is stronger. Think of yourself as having different advantages: speed versus strength, technique versus power, endurance versus intensity." Meanwhile, Kevin Hayes found himself working with Vorthak scientists on projects that had been stalled for years. His fresh perspective and human problem-solving methods helped them break through barriers they had been struggling with for decades. "The fascinating thing," Kevin told Jake one evening, "is that they're incredibly intelligent. More than that, they're creative and innovative when they're allowed to be. But their entire culture has been focused on one type of thinking for so long that they've forgotten how to approach problems from different angles." Perhaps the most significant change was in War Chief Thorgak himself. The massive alien had begun asking questions about human military tactics, not because he wanted to conquer humanity, but because he was genuinely curious about different approaches to conflict. "Your people have fought wars against enemies with superior technology," Thorgak said during one of their evening discussions. "How do you win such battles?" Jake smiled. "We don't always win, but when we do, it's usually because we found a way to fight that our enemies didn't expect. We use guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run attacks, psychological warfare, turning the enemy's advantages into disadvantages. And when you lose, we learn from it and come back stronger. Humans have a saying: what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. We don't just survive failures, we use them to improve." 3 weeks after the trials, Thorgak made an announcement that shocked the entire Vorthak Empire. He declared that the humans had passed their tests not just with honor, but with distinction. More than that, he proposed something that had never happened in Vorthak history: a true partnership between equals. "The humans have shown us that strength comes in many forms," Thorgak announced to the gathered High Council. "They have proven that survival is not about being the strongest, but about being the most adaptable. I propose that we offer them not subjugation or dismissal, but alliance." The debate that followed lasted for days, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The evidence of what humans could accomplish was too clear to ignore. When the vote was finally taken, the Vorthak High Council unanimously agreed to establish formal diplomatic relations with Earth. But more than that, they agreed to something unprecedented: joint colonies and shared research projects that would combine Vorthak's strength with human adaptability. As Jake prepared to return to Earth with news of their success, he realized that both species had been forever changed by their encounter. The Vorthak had learned that there were other ways to be strong, and humanity had gained allies who would help them take their place among the stars. 5 years had passed since that first meeting between humans and Vorthak, and the galaxy was no longer the same place. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES-VES Unity, a ship that represented everything the Alliance had accomplished together. Half human design, half Vorthak engineering. It was faster and stronger than anything either species could have built alone. The Unity was on its way to the newest joint colony, established on a world called Haven's Edge. It was the kind of planet that both species would have avoided in the past, a place where crushing gravity met toxic storms and underground rivers of acid. But working together, humans and Vorthak had turned it into something beautiful. Jake looked at the status report scrolling across his command screen. 112 colonies now existed in what people called Alliance space. Worlds that had been written off as uninhabitable were now home to millions of beings from both species. The partnership had exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. "Admiral," called out Navigation Officer Lisa Rodriguez from her station. "We're receiving a transmission from Earth Command. Priority 1. Put it through," Jake ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing General Patricia Coleman in her office back on Earth. The woman who had once been Jake's superior now served as the human liaison to the Galactic Council, representing humanity's interests across dozens of star systems. "Jake, good to see you," General Coleman said with a smile. "I have news that I wanted to share personally. The hegemony has requested our assistance." Jake felt his eyebrows rise. The hegemony was a collection of 12 different species that had been locked in territorial disputes for over a century. They were known throughout the galaxy for their stubborn refusal to cooperate with anyone, including each other. "What kind of assistance?" Jake asked. "Diplomatic assistance. They've been watching what we've accomplished with the Vorthak, and they want to know if we can help them resolve their conflicts without warfare. It seems our reputation for finding creative solutions has spread." From his position at the tactical station, Fleet Marshal Thorgak turned his massive head toward the screen. The former war chief had adapted quickly to his new role in the Alliance fleet, though he still preferred direct action to lengthy negotiations. "The hegemony species have been fighting over the same trade routes for decades," Thorgak said in his rumbling voice. "Each believes their claim is stronger than the others. They see compromise as weakness," General Coleman nodded. "Exactly. Which is why they need our help. They've tried everything else, and now they're willing to listen to species that found a way to turn enemies into allies." Jake exchanged glances with Thorgak. The big alien's mandibles clicked in what Jake had learned was the Vorthak equivalent of a thoughtful expression. Over the years, they had developed an understanding that went beyond simple communication. "What do you think?" Jake asked his partner. "I think," Thorgak replied slowly, "that we have learned much about cooperation in the past 5 years. Perhaps it is time to share what we have discovered." The mission to hegemony space took 3 weeks, but it gave Jake time to review everything the Alliance had accomplished. The changes had been dramatic and far-reaching, affecting both species in ways no one had predicted. The Vorthak had revolutionized their entire approach to problem-solving. Their engineers now worked alongside human designers to create structures that were both incredibly strong and surprisingly flexible. Their military had adopted human tactics that emphasized speed and adaptability over pure force. Most importantly, their society had begun to value innovation and creativity alongside traditional strength. Humanity had benefited just as much from the partnership. Vorthak manufacturing techniques had allowed humans to build colonies in environments that would have been impossible to settle before. Vorthak materials science had led to advances in everything from spacecraft hulls to medical implants. And Vorthak determination had taught humans new levels of persistence and dedication. But the real miracle was in how the two species had learned to work together. Human creativity combined with Vorthak engineering had produced wonders that neither could have imagined alone. Starships that could survive transit through stellar coronas, habitats that floated in the upper atmospheres of gas giants, terraforming techniques that could transform barren rocks into garden worlds in decades instead of centuries. When they arrived at the hegemony capital world of Concordia, Jake was struck by how different it felt from Alliance space. Everything seemed designed to keep the different species separate from each other. Humans had their districts, Vorthak had theirs, and the 12 hegemony species each maintained their own isolated communities. The meeting took place in a neutral conference facility that looked more like a fortress than a diplomatic venue. Representatives from all 14 species sat around a massive table, eyeing each other with suspicion that had been building for over a century. Jake looked around the table at beings he had only read about in reports. The crystalline Zephyrians who communicated through light patterns, the aquatic deepsworn, who wore environmental suits filled with their home ocean's water, the insectoid hive dancers, whose multiple limbs never stopped moving in complex patterns. Each species was impressive in its own way, but Jake could see immediately why they had never been able to work together. They were all focused on what made them different, on why their way was the only correct way to do things. "We have agreed to this meeting," said Ambassador Corvin of the Zephyrians, his crystalline body pulsing with patterns of blue light, "because we are curious about your methods, but do not assume we will abandon our rightful claims to accommodate others." Similar statements came from the other ambassadors, each one insisting on their species' superiority and their unwillingness to compromise. Jake listened patiently, remembering similar attitudes from his first meeting with Thorgak years earlier. When the formal presentations were finished, Jake stood up slowly. The table fell silent as all eyes turned toward him. "I'd like to tell you all a story," Jake began. 5 years ago, my ship encountered the Vorthak for the first time. We were terrified. They were the strongest, most feared species in the galaxy, and we were just humans, soft, weak, fragile humans. He gestured toward Thorgak, who nodded respectfully. "Fleet Marshal Thorgak here could have destroyed my ship without effort. His people could have dismissed us as irrelevant and sent us back to Earth with our tails between our legs." Jake walked around the table as he spoke, making eye contact with each ambassador. But something interesting happened instead. We challenged each other, not to prove who was stronger, but to prove who could contribute more to solving problems. Dr. Kevin Hayes, now serving as the Alliance's chief science officer, activated a holographic display showing images from Alliance colonies. What we discovered was that our differences weren't weaknesses to be overcome. They were strengths to be combined. The images showed humans and Vorthak working side by side on projects that should have been impossible. Cities built in the hearts of gas giant storms, mining operations that functioned in the cores of neutron stars, agricultural systems that thrived in the void of space itself. The Zephyrians have mastery over light and energy that no other species can match, Jake continued. The Deepsworn understand fluid dynamics in ways that could revolutionize space travel. The hive dancers process information with a speed and complexity that makes our best computers look primitive. He stopped walking and looked directly at Ambassador Corvin. "But you're all so busy protecting what makes you special that you never explore what you could become together." Maria Santos, now the Alliance's chief engineer, stood up and activated another display. "Look at this trade route dispute that's been going on for 30 years. You're all fighting over the same shipping lanes because you each think your way of using them is the only way." She highlighted different sections of the contested space. "But what if the Zephyrians used their light manipulation to create navigation beacons that the Deepsworn could use to guide ships through previously uncharted regions? What if the hive dancers coordinated traffic flow to maximize efficiency for everyone? Instead of 12 species fighting over one set of trade routes, you could have 12 species creating dozens of new routes that benefit everyone." The reaction was immediate and predictable. Several ambassadors began talking at once, insisting that their species' needs were too unique to be accommodated by such arrangements. But Jake noticed that a few of them were looking thoughtful, studying the displays with genuine interest. Ambassador Corvin's crystalline form pulsed with patterns that Kevin's translator identified as curiosity. "You are suggesting that we abandon competition in favor of cooperation?" "I'm suggesting," Jake replied, "that you discover what you can accomplish when you stop seeing differences as threats and start seeing them as opportunities." Fleet Marshal Thorgak rose to his full height, his presence filling the room with quiet authority. 5 years ago, I believed that strength was about crushing opposition. The humans taught me that true strength is about building something greater than what any individual can achieve alone. His orange eyes swept across the assembled ambassadors. "We offer you the same choice we made.